Hey guys, alright? Welcome everyone. This story begins in the depths of the ocean, where a dimensional rift called the Abyss has opened, from which emerged the first kaiju, an alien beast that advanced, destroying 3 cities until the army, with planes and tanks, finally stopped it after 6 days of combat. 6 months have passed since these events, and Earth would be attacked again, and it would not be the last time, as more and more kaijus would keep coming in the following months, plunging the whole world into crisis. This forced governments to unite to create the Jaeger program, where robots the size of kaijus were built to face them. In testing, scientists discovered that the Jaeger's neural interface was too much for a single pilot. Thus, they decided to modify it so that 2 pilots would control 1 hemisphere each. Thanks to this, they began to win battles, turning pilots into heroes and kaijus into merchandise, as the world now felt safe. One day, at the Alaska base, we meet pilots Raleigh Beckett and his brother Yancey, who are called to respond to an alert of a Category 3 kaiju approaching. While preparing to pilot their Jaeger, we meet the Chief of Systems, Tendo Choi, and the leader of the program, Marshall Stacker, overseeing everything. Once connected, after performing the neural link, where both enter each other's minds to bond as one, we see the brothers Jaeger, called Gypsy Danger, advancing through the ocean with the mission to defend the port 16 kilometers off the coast. A boat stuck in the storm has problems, as suddenly, in front of them, emerges the kaiju. However, disobeying their orders, Gypsy arrives to rescue the boat and start the battle right there. The fight begins with good punches and even shooting with its plasma cannon, and for a moment it seems they have defeated the beast, but after the base informs that the kaiju is still alive and unseen, it lunges at them. Gypsy tries to use the cannon again, but this time the kaiju is faster, rips off Jaeger's arm, and before they can think of a plan, the monster pierces the helmet's hull and takes Yancey. With no options, Raleigh uses his will to attack and, although continuing to receive damage, manages to use his other arm cannon to blow the kaiju's head off, leaving Gypsy without energy and unable to communicate with the base. The next day, when an old man and a child were looking for treasures in the ice on the coast, they end up witnessing how Beckett brings Gypsy with his last strength. 5 years later, humanity began to lose battles, as kaijus appeared more and more frequently, leading the UN to cancel the Jaeger program, leaving only 8 more months of funding, as they would use the funds to build a coastal wall in Alaska. In the construction of one of these walls, we see Beckett again, who now earns a living as a common worker. At lunchtime, he watches on television that a kaiju crossed one of the walls as if it were nothing but was defeated by pilots Jack and Herc Hansen aboard the Striker Eureka and their missiles. Just there, he receives a visit from the Marshal, who offers him to return as a pilot of Gypsy, as they rebuilt it, but sees that he refuses, as he does not want anyone else in his head after his brother's death. However, the Marshal gives him a speech about the end of the world and how it is better to die fighting than to die watching, and thus convinces him. Once they arrive at the last standing base, the Hong Kong base, he meets Mako Mori, who chooses the candidates to co-pilot Gypsy. Upon entering, he meets the research team, formed by Dr. Newton Geisler, a lover of numbers, and a physicist named Gottlieb. The tour of the facilities continues through the workshop, where he observes how the Jaegers still in operation are in repair and maintenance. Here, we see the Crimson Typhoon piloted by the Wei Tang triplets, the T-90 Cherno Alpha piloted by Sasha and Alexis Kaidanovsky, and finally, they meet the Hansen father and son in person. After the introductions, the Marshal reveals that the ultimate plan will be to install a thermonuclear head in the abyss to close it. After doing his calculations, Gottlieb explains to the Marshal that, in the near future, kaijus will appear every week, then every 8 hours, and so on until double attacks arrive every 4 minutes. But there is still hope, as he managed to predict that it is possible to open the doors of the abyss to enter and drop the bomb. Newton interrupts to say that, according to his research, the kaijus are clones and that, with the fragment of the brain he possesses, they can connect and discover exactly how to enter the abyss. However, everyone finds the idea too absurd, so they dismiss him. When Mako was showing the new Gypsy, Beckett meets Choi again. There he discovers that, although Mako was the most qualified to be a pilot, the Marshal has forbidden her to do so for some reason. Later, Beckett meets Jack, who immediately makes it clear that he considers him just a hindrance. In the afternoon the co-pilot tests begin, but none of them manage to defeat Beckett. Seeing this, he gets permission from the marshal to face Mako, who claims she can beat him. She proves to be slightly surpassed, as it all ends in a tie, and that's why Beckett chooses her, but the marshal immediately rejects her. Beckett doesn't understand why such obedience, and, although he tries to find out, Mako just says she must respect the marshal. Soon we would discover that the marshal is very sick. Meanwhile, in the world, protests occur due to the cancellation of the Jaeger program. In the laboratory, Newton decides to take a risk and connects to the kaiju's brain, managing to enter the connected mind of these creatures. Before dying, Gottlieb disconnects him. On the other hand, Mako is visited by the marshal, who, after thinking, gives her permission to pilot. Thus, she reaches Gypsy, where she reunites with Beckett, and already connected, they begin the neural link and successfully bond. Then the marshal goes to see Newton's situation. Newton explains that, when he connected to the kaiju's brain, he saw how everything follows orders, and they are colonization beasts sent by their superiors called the Precursors, who came to consume Earth and had actually been there during the dinosaur era, but the atmosphere forced them to wait until the world was sufficiently polluted. The marshal asks for more information and, as he does not obtain another brain, sends him with one of his black market contacts, Hannibal Chow. Meanwhile, in the training, Beckett has a memory of his brother that destabilizes them, and although he returns, we see that Mako does not, as she is reliving the exact day a kaiju attacked her city, killed her family, and pursued her. This makes her unconsciously activate the plasma cannon. Beckett tries to make her regain consciousness while a Jaeger has just arrived, but Mako is out of control, so to stop her, Tendochoi must cut off the power supply. After the incident, Jack openly complains about Mako and, when he has her in front of him, says she should have a leash to be controlled. This makes Beckett hit him, starting a fight that he wins without difficulty. After that, the marshal informs that Mako can no longer be a pilot for everyone's safety, but Beckett knows very well why he is removing her from the program, as he has been in her memory. Thus, we discover that on the day the Jaeger that saved Mako was piloted by the marshal, he adopted her as his daughter. But the marshal does not want to know anything and orders to follow his orders or leave. Having said that, Beckett and Mako meet again at lunch. There he apologizes for not having warned her about the risks of the first link. Suddenly the entire base is alerted about a Category 4 kaiju leaving the abyss straight for Hong Kong. The marshal sends all the Jaegers, except Gypsy, to protect the coast. On the other hand, Newton, who following the indications of the marshal's card, arrives at Hannibal Chow's base. There he asks for a brain, which he needs to connect again to a kaiju. Meanwhile, we meet the Category 4 beast that has just emerged and attacks the first Asian Jaeger. This one activates its cutting propellers and, with a maneuver, returns the blow to the kaiju. Another Jaeger arrives, but it is too slow to dodge the monster's tail attack. Seeing that they are being defeated, the strikers abandon their position to join the battle, but they are too far away to prevent the kaiju from spitting acid on Sherlock. When they are about to arrive, suddenly another kaiju emerges to finish destroying it. Stryker continues alone and tries to activate its missiles, but just then the kaiju launches a shockwave that disables the Jaeger and the entire base. With no options, the marshal accepts to put Gypsy into operation, as it is the only analog Jaeger that works with nuclear energy. One of the creatures attacks the city, and meanwhile, Hannibal Chow decides to take refuge in his private bunker and expels Newton, as he believes that, by being connected with the kaijus, they are looking for him. Then Newton runs desperately until he reaches a public bunker. Meanwhile, the Hansons decide to surface to attract the attention of the kaiju and distract it until reinforcements arrive. They are lucky, as right there the Gypsy appears. The battle begins with this Jaeger tearing off part of the kaiju's body, but then the beast manages to capture it and throws it into the port. Back on its feet, the Gypsy Jaeger responds with its rocket fist mode, then hitting it with containers from the site. However, this kaiju is very strong and they can only defeat it with the plasma cannon, shooting several times. At the same time, bad luck pursues Newton, as he is found by the kaiju, but fortunately the Gypsy arrives to rescue everyone and with a boat as a sword attacks the monster. However, this isn't very useful, as the kaiju's tail is quick enough to buy time and thus surprise it through a building. In the midst of the blows, the Kipsu launches its acid unsuccessfully and, although it tries to use its tail, It ends up losing thanks to Gypsy's freezing gas, which freezes the tail that is subsequently shattered. But the thing doesn't end, as the kaiju captures it and unfolds its wings to try to take it out of the atmosphere. However, Mako activates the swords with which they finally defeat it, splitting it in half. Falling freely, to cushion the fall, they use the Gypsy's reactor. Having passed the danger, Newton returns with Hannibal Chow demanding the brain he had. When the pilots return, we see that they are received as heroes, but the marshal orders to restart the countdown for the appearance of the next kaiju. Everyone witnesses his illness, as he bleeds from the nose without realizing it, all because, in the past, when he was a Jaeger pilot, it affected him. On the other hand, in the city, the extraction of kaiju material began. Here, Hannibal Chow's employees discover that the kaiju's secondary brain is damaged, but right there they witness the birth of its offspring, which almost devours Newton, although it does not resist because it is premature. Seeing this, Hannibal gloats for having predicted it, but suddenly, for a moment, the kaiju comes back to life to devour him. However, the little monster chokes and finally dies. When Beckett asks the marshal about his illness, he reveals that it is due to the fact that the first Jaegers had a lot of radiation and that the greatest exposure was in Tokyo, where he saved Mako by piloting a Jaeger alone. Since that day, he retired, as returning to a Jaeger would mean dying from radiation. At that moment, they are interrupted by Tendo, who warns about the presence of two kaijus in the abyss. This contradicts Geisler, as he had predicted there would be three. The marshal orders to prepare the last two Jaegers and, as Hansen's father is injured, the marshal decides to replace him as a pilot. After a motivational speech and Jack and his father's farewell, the final mission begins. At the same time, the scientists perform the link and discover that the plan will not work, as the Jaegers will not be able to enter the abyss completely. Gypsy and Stryker begin to submerge and soon reach the entrance, where they observe that the kaijus wait patiently for them to jump. Before the plan can fail, the scientists arrive and explain that to be able to enter the fissure, they must be attached to a kaiju, as the abyss reads alien DNA. The situation worsens when, before their eyes, a Category 5 kaiju appears, the first of its kind. Gypsy plans to find an opening to enter, but then is hit by the other kaijus that, as a team, tear off one of its arms. After killing a kaiju with its other sword, it uses the same to cut the kaiju crocodile in half. Meanwhile, Stryker manages to injure the largest, causing it to call for reinforcements, giving Gypsy the opportunity. For a moment, they hesitate, but everyone knows that the sacrifice is necessary. Thus, Stryker activates its bombs, exterminating the kaijus immediately. With no options and no more bombs, other than Gypsy's own reactor, it decides to use its own body as a weapon. Although the Category 5 kaiju reappears, instead of stopping it, it is used as a key in the abyss. They finally enter the alien dimension, and once there, Mako's oxygen is at the limit and, as it is no longer necessary, Beckett gives her his supply and sends her back to the surface, while he uses his last strength to reach the manual switch and thus activate the reactor's detonation. The Jaeger gets close to a platform where the precursors inhabit, and when there are a few seconds left for the explosion, Beckett injects himself. Soon there is a huge nuclear explosion, or it closes the portal. Both Mako and he reach the surface and, although at first Beckett has no pulse, upon hearing her tears, he reacts. Everyone celebrates the victory, and soon the duo is rescued. Back in the destroyed city, we see Hannibal Chow, who comes out alive from the stomach of the premature kaiju. The story continues 10 years later with Jake Pentecost, biological son of the marshal. Jake is no hero, as he spends his days partying as a mediocre influencer and makes a living by selling dismantled Jaeger parts on the black market. One night, he sneaks with others into a warehouse in search of a plasma capacitor. They arrive at the location, but don't find the part, making the guys think Jake betrayed them and are about to kill him. However, upon discovering that the real thief is still nearby, he uses a distraction to chase after him. After a pursuit, Jake is surrounded, but it was a trap, as he makes them fall into a dungeon. He continues advancing and manages to catch the thief, who escapes, but thanks to his radar, locates his hideout the next day in an old workshop. There, he discovers that there's a mini Jaeger called Scrapper under construction, overseen by the thief, who is actually a teenager named Amara Namani. At that moment, the police arrive, so they escape and scrap her. Later, they notice the presence of the Jaeger November Ajax. The small Jaeger scrapper uses smoke bombs to try to elude it, but it doesn't work. Then, Jake orders to climb up to Ajax's head, where they detonate one of its energy cells, immobilizing it, but not for long, as they are captured. In the cells, during a conversation, Amara reveals that she built the scrapper because she believes the kaijus will return and, when that happens, she doesn't expect to be saved. Suddenly, Jake is taken to the visitor's room, where he reunites with his sister Mako via hologram. She offers his freedom in exchange for returning to the Jaeger program as an officer, along with Amara as a cadet. With no options, both are taken to the base in China. There, Jake reunites with an old friend with whom he doesn't get along well, Officer Nate Lambert. Hearing their conversation, Amara discovers that Jake is the son of the famous marshal. Later, Nate introduces the other cadets, who are all teenagers. The simulations begin and Amara fails without a chance, as it's a realistic test. Jake tries to defend her, claiming that the simulation is too much for a cadet, but Nate disagrees. Later, the two come to a peace agreement until the cadets graduate. Nate reveals that the program is in danger, as Xiao is about to win the arms race with her drones, pilotless Jaegers. The next day, Xiao arrives at the base accompanied by her right hand, Newton. He reunites with Herman, who takes him to his laboratory to show him his latest project, where he plans to implant kaiju blood propellers in the Jaegers, as such fluid reacts when in contact with other rare elements on Earth. Newton refuses to help him, as he believes Xiao's work will solve all the problems. His conversation catches the attention of Xiao, who immediately orders him to stay away from Herman until his project is chosen by the High Command. Later, Xiao presents the functioning of her drones, claiming they are the best option. Meanwhile, Mako reveals to Jake that she plans to vote against it and wants him piloting the Gypsy as one of the honor guards on voting day. The day arrives, and the Gypsy lands piloted by Jake and Nate, while Mako approaches in a helicopter. However, moments after Xiao's arrival, a hostile Jaeger out of control called Obsidian Fury emerges from the sea and attacks with missiles. Mako discovers something about Obsidian's energy, but it blocks her communication before she can tell Jake. Thus begins the battle between the Jaegers, with the Gypsy being so beaten that it needs to draw the sword. Obsidian has two swords and they are in flames. The Jaegers fight, and in the fight between the two, Mako's helicopter is hit and begins to fall. Then the Gypsy uses its gravity wave to immobilize Obsidian and go after her, who had just sent important information. Unfortunately, Gypsy doesn't arrive in time and Mako dies. When Obsidian sees that there are more Jaegers on the way, it decides to retreat. Later, when Jake remembers his sister, he finds Amara practicing the neural link, still unsuccessfully. Jake, now more compassionate, decides to help her by connecting with her. Thanks to their memories, we discover that Amara lost her family in a kaiju attack, when they were all crushed. All this is too much for her, so she fails again. Shortly after, Jake attends a meeting where Herman manages to decode Mako's message, but still doesn't know what it means. Meanwhile, Chow informs Newton that his project has been approved and that it needs to be implemented in 48 hours. Then, he orders Newton to work overtime like any Chinese. After these events, Newton returns home and we discover that he now lives with the kaiju brain, which he treats as a girlfriend and even has sensory relations with it. At the barracks, differences among the cadets start to be noticed, as Cadet Victoria's jealousy leads to a fight. The argument with Amara doesn't last long, as Nate arrives to put things in order, in honor of the late Mako. Moments later, Herman informs that he has decoded Mako's message, which is the location of an abandoned base in Siberia. To investigate further, Gypsy is sent there, where it soon encounters the Obsidian Jigger, more focused on destroying the base than on them. The battle resumes with Gypsy pushing it through a fissure. They resurface from the ice, and Obsidian uses its energy core to attack, forcing Gypsy to take refuge in the water. From there, it uses bombs to also submerge Obsidian and surprise it. The hits continue on the surface, where Jake and Nate perform an old maneuver with which they manage to damage Obsidian. It counterattacks with its swords, but this time it doesn't work, as Gypsy dodges and with a direct hit to its core, the enemy is defeated. Immediately, the pilots discover that the Jaeger is not piloted by humans. Analyzing it, Herman explains that it is a kaiju brain, which seems to have been created on Earth by humans. Amara, very curious, disobeys orders and convinces her colleagues to infiltrate Obsidian. It all ends badly, as one of them is burned by the gastric juices in the Jaeger's wiring. As a consequence, Amara is expelled. Here, Jake gives her a speech about how only she can define how much she is worth, not the opinion of others. However, before leaving, she mentions that she discovered that Obsidian has Shadow Industries technology, as she recognized the peculiar left-side wiring. With this information, Jake, Nate, and Herman start to act to uncover the truth. Meanwhile, at Shadow Industries, just when the program reaches 100%, Newton witnesses as he loses control of two of his drones, which have just arrived at the junior base. They show being dominated by kaiju genetics, and soon the entire armor is consumed by the alien growing inside it. Amid the panic, Newton reunites with Herman, who believes that the killer drones were built by Shao behind his back. But before continuing speaking, they are found by Shadow Industries guards. Meanwhile, we see that at the base the active Jaegers are easily defeated, as they don't have time to react. Back with the scientists, they act a bit and manage to free themselves from the guards, reaching and taking over the laboratory. But here, Herman discovers that the culprit of everything is Newton, as he has just deployed his other drones to start opening abysses along the Pacific coast. At the base, everything gets worse and worse, as one of the attacks kills the program leader, Marshal Wan, and everyone wonders what the hell happened. It turns out that Newton, having this sensory relationship with the kaijus and being connected to the brain, ended up being manipulated by them without realizing it. Amidst the revelations, we see when Newton, controlled by the precursors, was about to kill Herman, but Shao appears and saves Herman. Actually, she was about to shoot him, but Herman feels pity and avoids it, allowing him to escape. Then, she informs everything to Jake and, thanks to Shao, they manage to deactivate all the drones before being crushed, and dozens of kaijus crossed the abysses, although they couldn't prevent some kaiju from crossing in time on the eastern coast. After the danger, Jake reintegrates Amara as a builder, as the deaths caused a shortage of personnel. Moments later, Herman arrives at the site accompanied by Shao. Analyzing the behavior of current and former kaijus, they discover that their true objective is Mount Fuji. In Japan, where there is an abundance of rare elements that react with kaiju blood, Herman understands that if the kaijus reach it, they will contaminate the atmosphere so rapidly that all life will be extinguished. As they are too far, Herman decides to risk and execute his thruster program. As most pilots are dead, the cadets are promoted to officers to go to war. Thus, the last 4 Jaegers are injected as space rockets and head to Japan. Meanwhile, the kaiju destroys everything in sight. Soon, the Jaegers arrive in Tokyo, where they intercept the kaijus. The Jaeger Athena starts with a good cut and a powerful kick, sending a kaiju into the air. Gypsy tries to attack another, but it absorbs its energy and returns the blow. Then, Amara's Jaeger, Bracer Phoenix, arrives. She uses her missiles, but they are not effective. Standing up, Gypsy uses its gravity wave and begins to launch buildings at the kaiju. Nearby, Athena performs so well that 2 kaijus team up to corner her, so the Jaeger Guardian Bravo must support her with its whip. The battle is being won by the Jaegers, so Newton, who is there, activates parasite drones from a Shao factory, which quickly merge with the kaijus to form a single, more powerful, and larger creature. The Jaegers advance with 2 arsenals, but a single blow from the kaiju sends them flying. Guardian immediately stands up and tries to attack alone but is humiliated, and the Jaeger is disabled, with one of its pilots dying. Thanks to Herman, they discover the location of the 3 secondary brains the kaiju has. Next, through a team attack, Athena destroys the first, but soon the Jaeger is hit and destroyed by the kaiju. Phoenix tries to attack but is easily shattered, and its pilots have to eject quickly to avoid death. The last standing is Gypsy, which manages to damage the kaiju with its plasma cannon, but in return, Nate is injured. Without rivals, the kaiju thanks Newton and begins to advance towards Mount Fuji, but Jake refuses to give up and plans to continue alone, which is impossible. Then, Amara arrives and takes control as co-pilot. This Jaeger is heavily damaged, so they plan to use thrusters to advance. As they are too far away, Xiao enters the scene, piloting Scrapper. She approaches and welds the rocket thruster to Gypsy's hand. With this, they begin to ascend, including the small Jaeger Scrapper, which gets stuck. When they reach sufficient height, they let themselves fall and, using the plasma cannon, set their course straight at the kaiju. When they are close and should have been ejected, the system fails and it seems they will die on impact, but right there appears Scrapper, which helps them escape in time, while the kaiju takes the full blow, causing a massive energy explosion. Then we see the dead kaiju, split in half. Newton fails but says he has a plan B. However, Nate appears to stop him. Before finishing, Jake orders Newton to tell the precursors that humanity is not afraid, because next time it will be them who will attack.